Hello and welcome to episode 299 of Retro Encounter, RPGFan's weekly podcast of many topics. I'm Mike Sollosi, and today we're here to talk about, I think, one of the most demanded games that we record for the podcast over the past year, 2 years or so. This is a very popular game both among RPG fan staff and among our listenership. It is Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne. Not the first Shin Megami Tensei game we've talked about on the podcast, but maybe one of the most important and high-profile ones. But who's here to talk about Nocturne with me? Two others, starting with Wes Iliff.
Hi there.
And Zach Wilkerson.
Hello.
Zach and Wes, I knew about Nocturne by reputation before I ever attempted to start playing it. It was a PlayStation 2 game that came out in, I think in Japan in 2002 and worldwide a year or so later. And Atlus's PS2 oeuvre, most of it was made in Nocturne's image. Something like 6 or 7 games really can claim Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne in their DNA. Yes. Maybe most prominently Persona 3 and Persona 4. So, before I talk about my background with this, let's talk about our individual backgrounds with this game, starting with you, Zach.
So I am a complete SMT noob. I have wanted to play an SMT game for, I don't know, a long time. I've been aware of it. I've played Persona 4 and 5, and I've also played Innocent Sin. And honestly, Innocent Sin definitely feels the most SMT of the Persona games I've played, by a pretty wide margin, honestly. But yeah, I mean, like, I feel like coming into it, like, I was aware of its difficulty. I knew about its difficulty, and it is not as hard as people have suggested it is, even though it's still a difficult game. But I feel like playing Persona and Dragon Quest previously makes me sort of prepared for what I was in store for. And I'm you know, I have some thoughts on it, but overall I'm liking it so far.
And to be fair, when I said this game had a reputation, I wasn't necessarily referring to overall difficulty. Like, I knew of this game for being unforgiving and for the hardcore only, and that a couple boss battles were super difficult. The ones that I was told of specifically being Matador and Trumpeter, I think.
Yeah.
And for the podcast, I guess I'm only about 10 hours in or so. I have finished the first of those, and it mostly lived up to its reputation. But before I go deeper into it, Wes, what's your background with Shin Megami Tensei?
I'm about as much of a core fan as exists in America without, importers or what have you. But this was more or less my gateway. I rented Persona 2 Eternal Punishment, which was the only game released in America at the time in the PS1 era. That was like my first exposure.
Well, the first Persona came out in America as well.
Yes. By that I mean we didn't get Innocent Sin, so we got part 2 of the Persona 2 duology. Persona 1 came out as Revelations Persona and changed a whole lot, and removed entire storylines. But Nocturne was really the one that I fired up, and it all clicked with me, and it made me a proper fan of the series. But I haven't played it much since its initial release, so this has been a big game changer now that I'm a lot more versed in the series.
Yeah, I mean, you even wrote our feature for the site about getting into the series. So
sure did. It's
awesome.
All right. Well, my background with the series is, I mean, probably closer to noob than expert, but maybe in between where the two of you are. I heard about SMT through websites like RPGFan and RPGamer and probably others in the early 2000s. I tried playing Persona 1 and Persona 2 Eternal Punishment in the early 2000s. I found them confusing, and that made me want to avoid Persona and SMT for many years. I noticed Nocturne's release, and along with the Raito Kuzunoha games and Persona 3 and 4 and Digital Devil Saga. I took note of them as each of them came out in North America because I was following video games in general and RPGs in particular, but didn't really try any of them when they came out. But then I finally sort of gave in, tried Persona 3 around around 2011 or 2012. Really liked it, and that piqued my interest in other SMT games. I bought a copy of Nocturne around then. Again, this would have been the early 2010s, but didn't play it. Played Persona 3, Persona 4, the first Digital Devil Saga. Really liked all three of them. Played the very beginning of Nocturne probably 3 or 4 years ago. I think we were even considering doing it for the podcast, but it ended up losing a staff vote quite a while ago. But didn't really get around to it and make a sincere effort to play it until now. I'm about 10 hours in. I am in Ikebukuro. I've beaten the Thor boss, and I've just done a little bit of fusing, exploring, experimenting after that. So now I need to look for I think is it Tomoe Gozen?
Gozo Tenno?
Gozo Tenno. Yeah, that's it.
Yes.
Right. I'm looking for Goze or Gozo Tenno right now, but I will probably get back to that a few hours after we're done with this recording. But that's our backgrounds with this. Let's get into the game proper. Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne. It's the third game in the SMT main series, but that game has had so many spin-offs and offshoots outside of the main series that its true number is probably, like, I don't know, 9th or 10th. Megami Tensei without the Shin was 2 RPGs for the I believe the Famicom and the MSX in the late 80s, early 90s, and they were based off of a popular science fiction novel in Japan. And then and they weren't even made by Atlus. They were sort of I think they were published by Namco. But then the first Atlus published game in the series was called Shin Megami Tensei, and between Shin Megami Tensei 1 and Nocturne, there were multiple offshoot games, including 9, which is a confusing numbering system, and If, which is about high schoolers set in a school and is sometimes called Persona Zero as a result. If came out for the Super Famicom, and the first 3 Persona games all dropped on the PlayStation 1 before Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne. And the version that all of us are playing is are all of us playing the remaster, or Wes, did you go back to PS2?
Yeah, I picked up the remaster to catch up a little bit quicker.
I am also playing the remaster.
As am I, even though I have it on PS2, mostly because if there was a modern amenity that could help me in this, that could help me play a game, it's this game, because again, I know of its reputation for being unforgiving. But where was I? We're playing the remaster, which means that we are technically playing the director's cut Maniacs version, because the original game came out in Japan, but then it had a director's cut, and the director's cut was the one released worldwide. So, like a lot of people maybe imported the original. So if you're playing with a guide, it will even tell you which parts are exclusive to the Maniacs version or not. When I was looking up some demon evolution details, there was always a footnote here or there about things added to the Maniacs version. But if you're playing a North American copy of Shin Megami Tensei 3 in English, it is Maniacs. So most of the Shin Megami Tensei games are set basically in a post-apocalyptic Japan, where the world is rapidly populated by demons after the apocalyptic event, and the main character has some dominion over demons, some special powers that they use to survive and navigate the new post-apocalyptic world. And Nocturne is not an exception. You start out just exploring a somewhat simplified version of Tokyo. You have 2 friends named Chiaki and Nita, and you're invited to visit your favorite teacher in the hospital, a teacher who has a weirdly close relationship to one of her students. And when you visit the hospital, there's a couple other people there, including a mysterious cult leader and a magazine reporter. And while you're at the hospital, something crazy happens. The rest of the world is plunged into apocalypse, and when you exit the hospital, the only humans that are around are the other 4 people that were in the hospital with you. So, Zach, you're again close to being a Nocturne noob like I am. What was your first impression going after the first opening scenes of this game?
I thought it was a really compelling opening. I really wasn't sure what to expect. Like, I always know that like SMT games have a reputation for being dark and difficult, of course, but like this kind of opening, I thought was a maybe the most compelling way you can open a video game. Like the world literally ends in your first like hour of playing, and like it ends around you in a hospital. And also, can I comment on the fact that yes, that student teacher relationship is very strange to me. As a teacher myself, I was like, "What? No, absolutely not."
Right.
Japanese fiction likes to play around with this a little bit more than maybe I prefer. Trails of Cold Steel being the worst offender, but
oh boy, I don't know if this is Trails of Cold Steel 3 or Fire Emblem Three Houses level of student teacher shenanigans. But as a teacher, you wouldn't invite an individual student to visit you in the hospital. Am I right?
Yeah.
That is certainly correct. That's a good way to like never be a teacher again. So no thanks.
Yeah, I guess I'm trying to think of other teachers in Persona games right now. There's the whole Snow Queen nonsense in Persona 1, and then
there's stuff in Persona 5 too.
Oh yeah, there's teacher stuff in Persona 5. There sure is, but we're not here to talk about either of those. Wes, what are your thoughts on the opening of the game and the sort of the mic drop of ending the world around 45 minutes in?
You know, I almost can't talk about it with going back in time to my first time playing it because, you know, there are games nowadays that, you know, you experience the end of the world, but before I'd played this, it was like FF6 and that was about it, which made this a wholly new experience. And then even before that point, even before the world ends, this like creepy abandoned hospital that you're in where you get kind of drip fed clues that not everything's as it's supposed to be in this hospital almost feels like a horror game. Like if I close my eyes and listen, I feel like I'm playing a Silent Hill game. I also feel like I'm playing a Shin Megami Tensei game. I guess that goes without saying. But it gives it this atmosphere of foreboding before the world actually ends. And it's this really compelling setup to like, okay, if this is the start, where do we go from here? And the idea that you're rebuilding, that you are going to be the one to guide this new world into whatever port it ends up in is super compelling and ever so slightly tweaked differently from the Shin Megami Tensei games that came before, where you were more of a human participant and you dealt with the orders of law and chaos, whereas in this one you're dealing with specific reasons and trying to figure out, okay, what is the guiding moral principle that the world should be renewed upon. Right,
and it doesn't get into the guiding principle stuff right at the beginning, but it's it's made clear that like when you meet the when you meet the cult leader guy his name escapes me, the guy with the sort of bad hair.
Hikawa,
that's him. Hikawa.
Yeah.
When you meet Hikawa in the hospital, like he's almost about to attack you until you're stopped by again your favorite teacher, and it appears that your teacher is a follower of Hikawa. Hikawa is the leader of a popular doomsday cult of sorts, but then when the apocalypse happens, it's an event called the Conception, which is a sort of a deliberate man-made end of the world. And after the conception occurs, the whomever is able to sort of not exactly like whomever is able to sort of conquer the newly ended world and sort of find the favor of Kagatsuchi and gather as much Magatsuchi is able to sort of take control and reshape the world how they see fit. And late again, I haven't quite gotten here all the way, although I had to do a little bit of background research for this. So please, Wes, if I'm wrong, correct me. Like based on the player's choices, they can sort of adopt a guiding principle called a capital R reason. Mm-hmm. And depending on the reason you develop over the course of the game will affect the game, will affect some end game bosses and the ending itself, exactly what happens to the world after you, the player, become the Demi-Fiend, or like the person who will become the architect of the new world. But right now, that architect has not been officially selected, and there is a survival of the fittest attitude of a world mostly populated by demons, most of whom take the forms of non-humans from various mythologies. And because again, this is something like the 8th, 9th, 10th game in the Megami Tensei Shin Megami Tensei series. There's again, I mean, like anything in a long running series, there's a loaded nature to everything happening here. Like it's not a coincidence that Thor, the thunder god of Norse myth, is working for Gozen Tenno, which is a sort of a sort of Buddhist collective mythological figure from I think sort of Japanese, Chinese, and Indian folklore. It's weird to an outsider or someone playing their first SMT game that they would be working together, but because this is SMT, like these are sort of characters in their own right and not just ripped semi-randomly from myth.
Yes.
Like what was your attitude or feeling of seeing all of these mythological deities interacting? Like, does it seem strange? Does it seem like because it's not weird to me, but it feels like I'm entering a conversation late, and I don't totally understand everything happening around me. Is that fair?
That is a great way of putting it. The idea of like entering a conversation late, and I feel like it's like a particular kind of storytelling that most video games, and honestly most American fiction at least, is not willing to engage with. That idea of like, hey, we're just going to drop you into a world that exists already. And it's weird that it exists already because you see the creation of that world. But there are so many people who are vying for control of what the world is going to be, at least like up to the halfway point that I am, that like seem to have a greater understanding of things than you do. And you're just like sort of like talking to those people and like slowly unfurling layers of it. And you know, the story here, I think maybe because like there aren't a lot of characters that I love, is not incredibly compelling to me personally, but I think that is a really interesting way of telling the story. And I think that, you know, the way you put it, I think is perfect.
And it's interesting as well, because it's not a game that's interested with maintaining a strict canon or like a causal point of plot with its characters. It's more interested in those reasons or the morality or the philosophical agreements that these mythical beings would theoretically have based on their history, based on their mythology. So it cares a lot more about, okay, these two would work together because philosophically they might be on roughly the same wavelength, whether it's, you know, Thor being, you know, something of a more survival of the fittest, you know, might makes right kind of character, which makes sense looking at the mythology that he comes from. So you're more informed by, okay, there's their background, but as far as the events of their lives, that doesn't really play into their part in this story. It's more about, okay, who would they be mentally, emotionally, and morally, and how do they fall in with, you know, the different factions that we have available to us.
And I mean, mentioning factions and alignments, perhaps famously, almost every Shin Megami Tensei game has a law path and a chaos path, or an order path and a chaos path, where that represent sort of maybe two of the philosophies clashing here. I know in Shin Megami Tensei 2, I believe that that a lot of the order path was represented by Norse gods, and a lot of the chaos path was represented by Hindu gods. So a lot of the portrayals of the Norse and Hindu gods in future games, including Nocturne, sort of like originated from that one. Like the reason Odin appears as a purple man with a tunic and a spear in that specific way is because of his sprite from a Super Famicom game many years ago, indirectly. But in Nocturne, you learn very early that two of the sort of bodies of power here are the Mantra Army, which is the Gozen Tenno and Thor group, and the is it the Nihilo organization?
Yeah. Nihilo or Nihilo or however it's pronounced.
It's nihilism, but my Japanese pronunciation brain wants to say Nihilo.
Understandable.
The Nihilo is run by Hikawa, the human cult leader that you meet early on in the game, and those two organizations are clashing because Nihilo believes in a sort of let's say an intellectual elegance, and the Mantra Army believes in a might makes right. And when you are captured by the Mantra, early in the game after soon after visiting Ikebukuro. They make you sort of win a trial by combat to prove your innocence, which you do because you're a hell of a badass in this game. But and then that's sort of where I am in the game now. I finished that trial of by combat. Now I'm looking for the some more leadership within the Mantra army. But Zach was mentioning not being able to connect to the characters in this game. There are a few characters in this game, but I think we already mentioned most of them.
Pretty much.
Which is, and when you look at the other games that sort of followed Nocturne in the Atlus PS2 lineage, all of them are more character driven than this one. And again, that's a bit of an extreme, like Digital Devil Saga, which is a game that I love. Really centers on these on the 6 main characters that are introduced at the beginning, and there's a lot of character growth and character journeys to go on those main 6. And the Persona games are so character driven that like a lot of the gameplay is sort of choosing which characters to interact with and which character paths you develop the most, with its whole system of 20 or more social links and character numbers in the dozens, and the Persona games are extremely character driven, even the ones before Nocturne, which are sort of highlights of that series. But we're going to play round 1 of a game called Nocturne Reminds Me Of, and Nocturne reminds me of, and again, I know both of you have played these, so I please tell me if I'm crazy or not. This reminds me of a RPG for the NES because it's not character driven or even plot driven the way that, say, a Final Fantasy game from 4 onward is, or a Dragon Quest game from 7 or so onward is. Like a Dragon Quest 3, Nocturne drops you a mostly blank slate of a character into a world, and you navigate the game's story by exploring the world, hearing, talking to NPCs, exploring different corners of the world, and then navigating through the plot, not because of major world-shaping events happening every few hours, but by you just encountering more of your environment. It's not character-driven or plot-driven, but environment-driven to me, and that reminds me a little bit of being dropped into Dragon Quest 3, and then boom, bada bing, bada boom, you got to find 6 orbs.
I think that's fair. And I think that like one of the other things that strikes me about this game, one of the things that I think sometimes for me personally makes it difficult to like play for long periods of time is like that sense of danger. Like I know every time I walk into a fight that like someone can like use an instant death spell on me and like my main character is going to drop and like I'm just dead. And that can sometimes be frustrating to me personally, but it also gives it to kind of go along with your NES thing. And I agree with everything else you said there in terms of it feeling like a blank slate and all those other things, but it also feels dangerous. Like it's like the game that I can think of the most where like, there are maybe like 3 screens I've been on that there aren't random encounters. And like, it's just like a constant sense of something is always there. And it reminds me of the way that I felt when I was playing, like, I don't know, Dragon Warrior 2 is the one that really makes me think of on that front. Like I could just like die at any moment. Like I'm gonna get wiped out, whatever. And so, yeah, that's actually, I hadn't thought about that comparison, but I think it's a really fair one. Like in terms of what drives this game is like sort of larger philosophical issues like we were talking about earlier with the idea of reason, but also the idea of like it being environment driven. And I think part of that environment is the feeling of consistent danger whenever you're moving around.
And I think that's part of what makes Shin Megami Tensei such an enduring, unique series, because it does definitely have those edges of, NES style, you are exploring, and the things that you find while exploring are what are driving, plot and activity forward, not necessarily actual events happening. But that the philosophical undertone and the fact that these environments are also built on the backs of the people living in them. You go into the sewer with the mannequins, and you see how they're being treated, and you see like the existential crisis that goes through this entire race of people made for this new world. And I think it's that edge that it brings that danger, not just, in gameplay, but also like story wise, that makes it feel slightly elevated above like a standard, okay, let's go explore adventure, but into the world of like, yes, this does clearly have things to say. I need to like pay attention to do them, but it's not going to have any characters to help pull me to that point, which makes it a lot harder to get into. And it's why, this is an enduring series, but the main line at least is always going to be more niche than something like Persona that can appeal to, Persona exists in a world where Final Fantasy existed and continued to progress. Shin Megami Tensei pretends that those evolutions never happened, and does not care at all about crafting a character. It wants you to follow its morality play.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that I appreciate about it is like in order to really progress in this game effectively, like you have to talk to the NPCs.
Yes.
And like that feels like part of that environmental storytelling to me too. Like I guess this game doesn't have a story. This game has a story. And I think the story is actually very compelling, even if it moves at a very, very slow pace because of just how much time you spend in dungeons. But it definitely gives it a particular feeling that I can't really point to another game that does, because I haven't played another SMT game. Like Persona definitely doesn't feel like this, not even Innocent Sin. It feels very particular. And I admire it for that. Maybe I don't love it for that, but I admire it for that.
Yeah, it's not a series that wants to meet you halfway. It wants you to come to it.
Yeah, I'm going to be comparing Nocturne to various other games, basically for both of these podcasts, which is not something that I love doing, but it's going to happen anyway. Like Nocturne almost feels like it's about loneliness to me, because you are alone in this harsh new reality. Maybe especially if you know Tokyo well, that the surroundings might seem familiar to you in part, but they've been ripped asunder. And there aren't any humans left to even like feel a closeness to. Well, Persona games are about the human experience and about social interaction to a degree, because again they're all at least connected to a high school experience, because that's the closest thing to a universal social experience that most people have is attending school with your peers. And like Persona is a game about making connections with your peers, while this is a game about being alone in an unforgiving world and surviving. But there are other humans. I think we've mentioned all of them, but
yeah, your
driving philosophy is more important than any human character in this game, which is different. And but again, the game's largely populated by demons, but they still it's unclear exactly what kind of time skip occurs at the conception, because there is definitely some time passing in between the event of the apocalypse and you waking up in the hospital basement, because these civilizations of demons don't spring up overnight. I don't think Nyx and Loki started hanging out that bar 24 hours after the world ends. It's not really. Did they ever tell you how much time passed when you awaken?
I don't recall it.
I'm a little over halfway, and they haven't said boo about that.
If I recall correctly, the space is kind of intentionally left blank and almost like metaphysical, in that these demons clearly existed before the conception, and like there's some carryover, some bleed between what they were before the conception and how they live now. That almost has to be implied. Yeah,
there was an extra dimensional space, and they existed in human belief systems and mythologies because of a spiritual connection to that space, but were never made manifest into the human world until now. So like some time passed, but it's not clear exactly how much, or maybe no time passed, but time did pass. We're getting into some nonsense physics trying to figure out that time skip, but there is some time passing, sort of, and over the course of that, like, because demons needed some kind of human presence just for slave labor and maybe other tasks, they created artificial humans called mannequins, which are human enough for you to believe they maybe were once human, but different enough to make you like feel extremely bad for their for their existence, which it seems some of them wish for death. It's it's depressing finding that mannequin colony in the sewer and learning of their plight. And then when you go to the to the mantra base not long after, like seeing mannequins around clearly living a life of abuse and hard labor makes you realize, oh, okay, maybe it's good that I awoke as a human with superpowers and not just as a level one nobody. But you aren't exactly a level one nobody, because you meet a mysterious boy and mysterious woman and a mysterious old man that might be the same as the woman. I'm not totally sure on all of that make it clear right at the event of the conception that you are special, and you have strength to fight the demons and sort of powers that let you to negotiate and control these demons, which gets to round 2 of this game reminds me of this game reminds me of game, and that is Pokemon. Not for obvious reasons of recruiting and putting forth a starting lineup, but 99% of the enemies in this game are things that you can recruit and add to your team eventually. Just like how in a Pokemon game, your entire party is Pokemon and 100% of your enemies are Pokemon. The same is true of Nocturne, with the exception of you yourself, because I don't think you fight yourself at any point, and maybe some special boss fights that don't eventually become recruitable demons. But largely, everything you see and fight in this game is something that can become part of your party not terribly long after fighting them. And that I don't know, that creates a sort of a oneness, a continuity that I think is really fun. And getting to know the demons of this world and recruiting them and fusing with them and playing around with the whole demon negotiation system, and having your party, like, you can fuse your entire party into one demon and then recruit yourself back up to a full party of 8 and then fuse them to make them stronger again, without a huge time investment. Like it's the grind of this game is navigating dungeons that can be kind of long and challenging, but also building your team of and like constantly evolving your team of demons through sometimes a Pokemon like evolution and sometimes through a more Persona like fusion system that makes it it's a fun level of RPG tinkering, and I always enjoy some level of RPG tinkering. So what kind of adventures have you guys had with demon negotiation, recruitment, and fusion?
Well, I'm glad you brought up evolution, because this is an interesting one in that it's the first mainline, certainly there might have been 1 or 2 spinoffs, but the first mainline Shin Megami Tensei where demons can evolve. And I feel like that, in reviews at the time when this was released, really drove home the Pokemon comparison to people. You get a little bit more attached, and then you still have to fuse them to pass the more daunting challenges sitting in front of you. So it's this weird give and take of, you get really attached to one of these demons, you work so hard to catch one, it evolves, you give it the right abilities, but eventually it's going up on that altar, because you're not going to be able to fight Matador unless you have something that has the right resistances. So it really did bring elements that people were familiar with in America and Pokemon to, the more traditional Shin Megami Tensei that was nigh unheard of in the West.
And also, they don't really give you a Pokemon-like tutorial on how all of it works at the beginning. Most of it has to be discovered for yourself, or if you're like me, and I hope you don't mind me saying probably like both of you, there are there's a large amount of internet resources that you can indulge in to look up the finer points of demon recruitment and evolution. But the game does give you some teaching moments to help with this. Like, you recruit a Pixie very, very early in the game at, I think, level 4 or 5. And then Pixie can evolve into High Pixie at, I think, level 10. So you get a low-level demon and see it evolve very, very soon. And that, will at least tell the player, hey, demons can level up and evolve, and you want to evolve demons if you can, which led to me, consulting a list, seeing that Inugami evolves into Makami. So with the moment I got an Inugami, I decided, you know what, homeboy, you are staying with me until you evolve, because this seems pretty good. And sure enough, a couple evolving demons have been among the mainstays of my party,
Yes.
including I think Mikami is my highest level demon right now.
Mikami's a boss.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm at level 40 and I still have a Mikami in my party.
I like this Mikami a lot, so that's somewhat comforting to me. Because again, my main character is only level 21 right now.
You know what's
but again, this game does not do a lot to explain things to you, but it gives you tools to learn how everything works. And we mentioned that Matador is a really challenging boss fight for when you meet it. I knew that Matador was going to be a hard boss fight. I was level 15 when I tried to fight it. It went very poorly. But then I noticed that my demon that did the best in battle by far was my Nozuchi, which I think was also level 15, but it had drain wind, so it lasted against Matador's wind attacks, or I should say force attacks, very, very well. So that got me to look up what some of the future demons I could fuse were. I saw that there were 2 really good ones at level 17, 18 that had wind resistance. So I grinded up to level 18, fused the necessary demons, challenged Matador again, and won on my second attempt. And also Matador uses speed boosting very, very liberally with an attack that boosts its speed by 4 levels right when you start battle. And that was a teaching moment, again, to try and tell players, hey, stat boosting in this game is very effective, and there are stat boosting and stat lowering skills everywhere, so you probably have a bunch of them already without trying, which I did. And keeping Matador's speed down and my character's attack and speed up was key to me eventually beating him. And so... yeah, the game doesn't tell you that your demons can evolve and you should always be fusing demons and that stat boosting and stat lowering is powerful, but then it shows it to you very quickly, and it should become part of player strategy, without them explicitly telling you. They do a better job of explaining how good stat boosting is in this game than Pokemon ever has.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it definitely taught me that Fog Breath is the most important ability in the entire game. Very quickly, because it's like 2 shots of that, and like even at level 40, like that usually makes bosses miss me a lot. And we haven't talked about like the fact that combat has like the idea of turn order in it, and a miss is incredibly important because it causes you to lose a turn, or your boss that you're fighting to lose a turn. And like the stat boosting and lowering, like Warcry and Fog Breath are like, I have someone in my party every time I hit a boss that has those 2 abilities.
I was so upset when I fused my Shisa, it couldn't pass on Warcry. I was so upset because Warcry.
I just wouldn't in that case. Just because of how much I always have. Like I know, like I have two demons right now that have Fog Breath and one that has Warcry, and I will never lose that ability for those 2. And they will always be my party. So yeah, I mean, like because it makes it very clear that and I think that the Matador fight is good for that. Like I barely scraped by my first fight with Matador, but I didn't have a lot of good spells yet. I think the reason that Matador is so hard is because you haven't had the opportunity to fuse a lot of good demons yet, unless you really know what you're doing. And I didn't. But it did teach me like, hey, agility is king in this game. And that has been a lesson that I've carried forward, because I feel like the game actually teaches you how to play it reasonably well, except for that fight. But that fight then ultimately teaches you how to play the rest of the game, because you need to learn the lessons from that fight to clear the rest of the fights as you go forward.
I think that's what's fascinated me the most about this playthrough versus, 10 plus years ago, is for this game has rightfully to some degree a big reputation for being really difficult and really hard to parse out, but it also does an amazing job of teaching you how to play it just by its sheer systems alone. The press turn system, where you're rewarded with extra turns for hitting weaknesses. This game came out in a time when elemental weaknesses weren't that important in most RPGs. We kind of take it for granted.
I wouldn't say that. Like elemental weaknesses have been important for a while, but
I think it's not a common, like, it's not, there are so many games where you can just spam your strongest attacks or go full physical and succeed to some degree or another. This is one of the few games where, like, yeah, elemental weaknesses are important in a lot of RPGs, but there were few at the time where it was absolutely necessary. Like, you could not succeed without them.
It's the difference between living and dying, especially in like
I would
big game
still call
bosses.
I would still call that an overgeneralization, but definitely this is not a game that you can brute force, and managing elemental weaknesses and is very important. Going into how the press turn system works, you gain extra turns for hitting enemies with their weaknesses or by scoring critical hits, and then you lose a turn completely, not just the one character's turn, but also a future turn if you ever miss. So, as Zach mentioned, agility is incredibly important because missing you should say, like doubly a double penalty and not just a single penalty. And like Wes said, hitting elemental weaknesses is super key, not only for dealing extra damage, but for generating extra turns. The press turn system returns almost in its entirety in Digital Devil Saga, and I think also in the Raito Kuzunoha games. While in Persona, it's replaced by a system that does grant extra turns from the critical hits and weakness hitting, but instead of having the unforgiving turn skipping, it just gives you an all-out attack if you're able to knock down the entire enemy field with elemental weaknesses, which is a little bit less punishing but still quite rewarding evolution of the press turn system. But this version is very unforgiving, and I should mention that I hit a bit of a wall in this game, not at the Matador boss fight, but considerably earlier when I think I was looking for the 1,000 yen bill. That's a little, which is sort of like the thing you have to do in the story before Matador. I explored way too far and died on the highway overpass to a bunch of angels casting Mahamon. And in this game, if your main character dies, you get in the game over, which I discovered very randomly and unpleasantly. Losing about probably a little over an hour, maybe 90 minutes of progress. And then when I tried to start up the game again, making sure to avoid that area, when I was scrolling through my demon skills, I accidentally dismissed one of the demons in my party in the middle of battle, which means you lose it permanently. So like it's way too easy to accidentally permanently remove something from your party, and that made me upset, and I restarted again and didn't play the game for like 3 days because of that awkwardly placed mechanic. But yeah, this game is unforgiving. It's like there's no auto saving. And I'm torn between being, like, hey, I've been playing RPGs for years, I should know better than to make these mistakes and save more frequently, and also I don't know. I wish this game had a few more modern amenities so that it was a little bit less easy to completely screw yourself up.
I know this is a bit rewinding, but I kind of want to go back because, aside from whether or not elemental weaknesses, were a big thing before this, the one thing that I think is interesting about this combat system and how it teaches you to play is that it's not just rewarding you with, additional damage, and it's not just rewarding you with those extra turns. It's giving you UI elements that really drive home the fact that, like, when you hit a weakness, it, not just by larger numbers, but it'll straight up tell you, it'll give you that extra turn. Yeah. And the same thing that it grants you, when you get a miss and you see a couple of their turn orders disappear, and when someone does something to like increase the number of turns that they have, which bosses will do from time to time, all of it drives home the importance of all of the mechanics that you need to know, hitting weaknesses, using buffs, like all of that comes through in the actual combat system itself. So while it is absolutely like this, as you said, this punishing game that won't let up and you have to find the right answer, it gives you the tools to find the right answer for any given fight, which is kind of fascinating because there is an answer, and the answer is rarely, if ever, grinding, unless that grinding is to get you to a point where you can fuse the right demon. You need the right tool set for any given fight, and that's pretty much the entirety of your prep needed.
But yeah, this is not a game you can brute force, and enemies follow most, if not all, of the same rules you have to follow about turn order and hitting weaknesses and avoiding misses. They can break the rules occasionally by giving themselves extra turns with special moves that the player can't access. But in general, this rule set is something that everyone has to follow, and the player can exploit them, or maybe exploit is a stronger word. The player can succeed by maximizing by maximizing these rules, and instead of just getting by with whatever.
Yeah, and one thing we haven't talked about yet, and I absolutely I think that's what, like, despite the fact that this game like is so oppressive is the way that I would describe it. Like, I feel like it just feels like I'm like moving through it like in a way that like the game is like working against me. It because of the way that the combat works, it makes it move quicker, and I love good turn-based combat. And like, if you describe like the perfect game to me, it would be this game, but sometimes like I'm like, oh gosh, I want to go like see like some sunlight or something. But one of the things we haven't mentioned.
Bleak.
Go ahead.
I was just saying, this is a bleak video game, straight up.
Yes,
it is. But one of the things we haven't mentioned that I think is interesting is the ability to change your demon as well with those Magatamas. Mm-hmm. Changing stats, but probably most importantly, changing what your weaknesses are. I think is a really, really cool thing. And like, there have been a couple times that I've gone into a fight and like, I have been like, just like pulverized. I'm like, oh, so like, I need to have like strength against ice. And I like that it, again, and I think it just goes back to everything that you were both saying, like, it gives you the tools to deal with it, even in like your character. And I can't think of a game, and I could be just missing something, that allows you with the ease this game does to adjust sort of what the strengths and weaknesses of your main character are. Like, I know, like I read at some point, like, make your main character have a physical build. So I'm doing that. Like, they have no, like right now they have like stat boosts, and I know that eventually those will go away. But like, otherwise it's physical skills, and like my demons are the ones like I try to have some variety with. Like, I know that I can adjust to a demon that like is going to hit me with ice spells, and I can hit them with fire to like, hit their weaknesses and take them down in 2 turns. And that's like incredibly satisfying, that it gives you so many tools to work with. And demon fusing isn't punishing either. Like, you have the ability to, like, if you have the money, you can go like summon a demon you've already called before, which is really cool. And I know that other games do that later, but it feels so much more important here than it does even in Persona 2 Innocent Sin.
A lot of these staples were very much foundationally put together here. Like, even the ones that weren't, made here were kind of modernized in Nocturne, that persisted throughout the rest of the Shin Megami Tensei games and spinoffs, including Persona.
Yeah, I wish they introduced the compendium a little bit earlier in this game.
Yes,
but it's still a very cool tool for managing your party and managing fusions, and you're only really limited by money and items for building up your party again. It's not that hard to go out and recruit some more demons, even though they'll demand to drain your HP or give them money or items. It's a good thing that life stones are easy to come by in this game. Otherwise, I would.
That is the truth.
Yeah. Can we
talk about how much I hate demon negotiation here?
Yes, yeah. I'm okay with this.
It's a little too random, and I have thrown away money unnecessarily for demons only to decide they don't want to hang out anymore, like a few too many times. Yeah. But I'm glad that it's something a little bit more complicated than throwing a Pokeball, at least. And also, there's one other thing we mentioned, that over this world there's sort of an artificial sun called Kagatsuchi, which is again a Japanese fire god. That sort of manages everything, and the phase of Kagatsuchi changes every several seconds. And if Kagatsuchi is at a full gibbous, then demons behave more wildly, and the encounter rate is higher. And if the Kagatsuchi is in a full new moon or eclipse state, then the encounter rate's way down. And some demons can only be recruited if the Kagatsuchi is near full. Some can only be recruited if it's almost new. You can only do your special 3 like triple fusion technique at the fusion cathedral zone. I forget what is it. Was it the Shadow Cathedral? The Shadow Temple?
Yeah, Cathedral of Shadows.
That's what it is. Yeah, you can only do your triple fusion at the Cathedral of Shadows if it's a full Kagatsuchi. Like, it's like managing the waxing waning state of the game's sun is a major factor in what you can do. There's a lot of systems in place with enough breadcrumbs for the player to figure things out that it stands out as really good RPG design here. Like this is a minimalist narrative with some like maximalist mechanics in this game. And again, there's no weapon or armor system, but the Magatama system that, you know, can dictate your elemental strengths and weaknesses and your skill set and special passive abilities is really fun and powerful. And finding a new Magatama, again, it's uncommon because I think there's probably only 20 or 25 of these in the whole game, is like getting a new Magatama feels so awesome because you know how effective Magatama are, and getting a new one can completely change the nature of your main character. It's there's so much good in this game, even if I don't want to say it has a weak narrative. It has a narrative that is not character driven, and as such feels a little bit more empty and lonely than than most RPGs that I'm used to playing.
It's almost impenetrable comparatively to a lot of more, you know, narrative and character driven RPGs. It doesn't want to let you in. You have to try to be let in.
You have to work a little. This isn't a very friendly dog that immediately wants cuddles. This is a somewhat aloof cat that will not give you those cuddles until you trust it a little bit and feed it and put some time into it.
That extends into the mechanics a little bit too. You know, you both talked about how troublesome negotiation can be, which is absolutely true, to the point of it, you know, one could consider it unfair. And I feel like that's for good or ill, that's intentional. You know, that's driving home kind of the hopeless situation that you're in within the game world. And, you know, you can make excuses for that. You can also just say, oh, it's frustrating as hell, which I think is 100% valid. But it feels, you know, very deliberately frustrating as hell, very intentionally wanting to give you that frustration.
Yeah, there are roadblocks and specific points of this game where the designers are forcing players to, like here you need to grind a little bit more. Here you need to have this kind of party to proceed. Here you're going to have to make a hard choice that will maybe shape the end game. This is a game that has, you know, it has consequences. It's not super difficult, but it's unforgiving and makes the player learn, which is a very powerful feeling when you do succeed. Again, we're going to play round 3 of I think this game is like this other game. It's a little bit Soulsian in that
knew it was coming.
It has a reputation for difficulty, but really it's not a hard game. It's a game that, you know, requires some mastery, but it's not. But like if you follow the rules and learn the rules, you'll get there. Like this is a really interesting minimalist RPG with maximalist mechanics, which is my impression only about 10 hours in, because I know I have a long way to go. It's, again, my main character is level, I think, 21, and I was given the impression that you should be fighting the final boss in the level 75 to 80 range, so I have a while to go.
I mean, it's funny that you bring up the Dark Souls thing, because I would agree with you if I was good at action games.
I have not really
if I had good reflexes, I would agree with you.
I have not played any Souls game to a level where I can say I've played it. I've tried out the first few hours of 2 of them, which definitely doesn't count. But I have put so many hours into Monster Hunter that I know that I feel like I know a thing or two about games that only seem challenging until you understand them better. And that's, even though Nocturne is turn-based, that's the feeling I get. Like, this is not a brutally hard game. This is an unforgiving game that forces the player to learn.
I think the difference between something like this or something like Dark Souls or something like Monster Hunter and other games that you could consider difficult but in a more frustrating way is just the fact that it's deliberate. It's anytime you run into a roadblock in Nocturne here, you feel like they put that roadblock there on purpose. It's never like, oh, they clearly didn't think this through hard enough and the balance here is off. It's, oh, this is a challenge that I need to overcome, but there is a solution to it. And I think that's why people like Souls games to a degree, like why they like the challenge of Souls games or almost any challenging game, is they want there to be some element of fairness, of you know, the designers thinking it through. Putting it there intentionally.
I mean, I totally agree with that, but I still think they made a balance miscalculation with Matador.
That's
like he feels just a little too hard for where he's placed in the game, and Matador wasn't in the original Nocturne. He was only added for the director's cut Maniacs version, Which
it feels even more so out of place.
Yeah, exactly. Which maybe I mentioned that in earlier. I don't remember if I did or if we discussed it before recording. But that whole like a candelabrum or is it or menorah side quest.
Menorahs now.
Yeah, the menorahs now, right? Okay, that whole side quest of fighting these skeletal riders for their menorahs and getting further in the labyrinth of Amala. It was added to the director's cut of the game, which is part of why those bosses maybe feel a little too difficult for where you can encounter them earliest. Although I think the only really mandatory one is Matador, I think.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to get the true ending, you have to go through and kill
like
all of them, and then also, or the true demon ending or whatever you call it. I don't know. I haven't gotten there yet, so I don't know if I'm going to do it.
It's the closest thing to a good ending that a Shin Megami Tensei game comes with.
Right. I know most Shin Megami Tensei games have a law ending, a chaos ending, and then some kind of neutral ending.
Yeah.
Nocturne has 3 endings based on alignment, then a neutral ending, which is good-ish, then a true demon ending, which is basically walking down the neutral ending path, but also completing this optional challenge. And then maybe there's also a 6th one that I'm not remembering.
There's a bad end up in there too.
Okay, there's a bad one.
Essentially.
I didn't do full research. I just noticed that there were multiple ones, and most of those are based on those reasons or philosophies that you adopt as you play the game. But we are not close to talking about any of those yet. We are still barely exploring post-apocalyptic Tokyo that is somehow folded into itself. So the entire world is Tokyo, a part of the apocalypse that we glossed over a little bit. And there's and even though this is not a game with a lot of named characters or human characters, there are some that we still haven't met. I don't really know what happened to our teacher after all of this. I assume she's with Hikawa, but I have not gone through that very conspicuous Nihilo building yet.
I don't know for sure yet either, and I'm well past that. So
right, I know it's coming, but I have not reached there.
You'll be getting hints, but yeah, it'll be a bit.
Yeah, this is like playing a Dragon Quest game on the NES. You have really got to talk to everybody to find the 1 or 2 rumors that are key to finding the next thing. It took me a little too long, because I was stubbornly trying to avoid using a guide, to figure out there was a back entrance to the room where Loki had a 1,000 yen bill. I have to go to a hidden back room. Great.
I found it, and then it took me a long time to figure out how to get him to walk away.
Yeah. You have to hit the right trigger for it to be.
Yeah, you have opaque event triggers as NES as hell.
You have to hit the exact event flag. I think probably by talking to some mannequins before getting there. Maybe.
Yep. I believe that's the one.
Right.
One specific mannequin in the bottom level of. Sorry, this is too fresh for me.
yeah. This is the mannequins remind me of a much sadder version of Morlocks from the old from X-Men comics. It's there is so much that's dark and depressing about this game. But also so fascinating and empowering about the mechanics of this game that it's a very deliberate grind with a very, they are not trying to tell you a story that goes plot point by plot point. They're trying to have you master these video game mechanics and play the game instead of just hear the story. It's again, if I was just I think this is a game that I don't watch a lot of Let's Plays, but this is a game that I would hate watching a Let's Play of, because when I'm watching someone play a video game, the rewards are story moments or really flashy set pieces, and this game doesn't really have either of those things.
No.
So it's a different vibe of RPG, but it's a popular one because the SMT fans are out there, and RPGFan has been mockingly called SMT fan before because especially during the 2000s, RPGFan looked extremely favorably upon SMT and Persona games and those ilk as they were coming out and we were reviewing them. Although the 3 of us all joined RPGFan after 2010.
I think Kaseki fan is a more accurate accusation.
Yeah, in the 2010s, I would say it's SMT fan in the 2000s and Kaseki fan in the 2010s. I think that is extremely fair. In the 2020s, let's make this DQXI fan. That's my.
I'm here for it.
I'm in.
All right. I knew I assembled the right panel for this episode.
Yeah, you got the right crew. So what's interesting is we talked about those story points that are kind of lacking, but I'm having a lot of like outside of the game stories growing from this.
Oh yeah. And emergent narratives from gameplay.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And the biggest one that came for me, I was playing this downstairs. I've got a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old running around, so I have to be cautious about where I play M-rated games. This is less objectionable than a lot of them for like 90% of the time you're playing, but I was playing in the mannequin sewer dwelling when my 7-year-old daughter came down. And I was like, okay, there's nothing objectionable here. I can find a save point before I quit. And she was watching. And then I went and talked to one of those mannequins. And for those, listening along at home that haven't played this game yet, all of the mannequins look very human, but their eyes are a little bit distant. Mm-hmm. They're all wearing the same clothes. And every once in a while, as part of their idle animation, they just twitch, really unsettlingly. Just do this really odd, halfway through a breath, ragged twitch. And my daughter came down and seemed perfectly fine, was interested in what I was doing. I went and talked to one of those mannequins. It zoomed in. They did the twitch. And I have never seen my daughter bolt out of the basement quicker. Just like, nope, not having any of this.
Oh, wow.
You said we're a horror movie.
Yeah, my 7-year-old and my 5-year-old are my names for my 3DS and PS4. which gives you some idea of my lifestyle the past.
Sollosi, that might be the best joke you've ever told.
I appreciate that one deeply.
All right, well, okay. If I am somehow comparing my let's say intermediate age consoles to actual children, it is definitely time to end the episode. Listeners, thank you so much for joining us on part 1 of this discussion on Shin Megami Tensei 3/Nocturne. I guarantee you that we will get more into end game story discussion and more into these characters that I've barely met in my 10 hours of playing the game in part 2. But part 2 is not coming next week. Listeners, if you understand the concept of integers, you probably realize that after episode 299 comes episode 300. Episode 300 is not going to be Nocturne Part 2. It is going to be a special boutique episode because we do something special and weird every 50 episodes, and Retro Encounter episode 300 is no exception. I will not tell you exactly what we do in it, but I will tell you it is called Retro Encounter Battle Royale. Please look forward to it. But after that Battle Royale, we are going to do part 2 as episode 301. We have not recorded it yet for very obvious reasons. And then after more Nocturne, we are going to have an episode all about the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles. Me and a few others in RPG-Fan are big Ace Attorney fans and are chomping at the bit to talk about the recent let's say worldwide release of the Great Ace Attorney games, which originally were for 3DS but are now for a whole bunch of consoles and available everywhere. I am probably it's a collection of 2 games. I am probably a little bit past halfway on the first one, but it is already so good that I cannot wait to talk about it. That is going to come in the first week of December. The rest of December is going to be pretty exciting. We are doing 2 episodes on Persona 2 Eternal Punishment, a game that we inadvertently mentioned earlier this episode. And we're also going to do another Persona episode that month that has not assembled yet, so I don't want to talk about it, but there's going to be plenty of Persona in September. I also have been writing quiz questions, listeners.
Oh, no.
Yes.
So we are going to do another quiz show episode. I think it will be December. I'm sorry, I think it will be September, but if I can't write all 60 questions in time, it might get delayed. So
I just hope I get to round 2 this time.
Believe in you.
I don't.
So listeners, coming up on Retro Encounter, we have episode 300, more SMT3, then Great Ace Attorney, then a whole bunch of Persona, then some quiz shows, and that is all I am prepared to share at this time. But listeners, if you have something that you want to share with us, you can email retro@rpgfan.com. You can also comment on our message boards, visit our Facebook page, our Instagram, our Twitter, our Discord server, our YouTube channel, our Twitch channel, something streaming every day on Twitch. More stuff going up in all of those venues every day. Please interact with RPG Fan however you choose. We also have 3 other podcasts: Random Encounter every 2 weeks, mostly about randomness; Rhythm Encounter every 2 weeks, mostly about RPG music; and Phoenix Edge, usually every week, mostly focused on current events. You can review Retro Encounter or all 3 of those others on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, however you're listening to us. Podcast Addict is a popular one. I use a podcatcher that I think draws from Apple Podcasts and Google Play. So there's lots of ways to listen to podcasts. Please listen to those and rate those however you choose. But if you want to reach us at a more individual level, let's tell the listeners how to do that, starting with you, Zach.
You can email me at zachw@rpgfan.com, or you can find me on Discord at zachw.
And Wes.
Your best bet is to hit me up on Twitter. My DMs are always open, at Wes Iliff.
And listeners, the best way to find me is also Twitter. I am at The Real Monsoon most of the time, at Evoker for Dogs other times, and on RPG Fans Discord, I am Monsoon Mike. But we have a lot of post-apocalypse Tokyo left to explore. I am taking a full week off work, not to just play video games, but video games will feature heavily, and that is exactly when I'm going to finish this game. So thank you, Wes. Thank you, Zach. Thank you, listeners. Good night, and good luck.